Good afternoon and welcome to this session for an interface with Mr. Tobias Veit from Berlin, Germany, well-known director. I hope I am not too wrong with the pronunciation. Please excuse if it has been said. He will be in conversation with Dr. Anuradha Kapur, who has been former professor and director of the National School of Drama, and we are extremely happy to have both of you here with us today, and a very warm welcome to you both. I request Professor Vaman Kendre to formally felicitate and greet the guests. Thank you for being here. I now request Vandana Vashisht to give us a brief introduction, which can then set the tone, and then Dr. Kapur will be in conversation with our guest today.
A very warm welcome to all of you, and good afternoon. Tobias Veit, Executive Director of the Schaubühne Berlin, has studied directing at the Academy of Dramatic Arts Ernest Besuch. He has been working at the Schaubühne since 1999, first as Head of Artistic Production, since 2012 as General Manager. From 1998-99, he worked as a production manager of the Barraque of Deutsches Theater under the artistic direction of Thomas Ostermeyer and Jens Hilliche. I really tried to be correct. Dr. Anuradha Kapur, former Director of National School of Drama, New Delhi, has taught and directed in India and abroad. She has written widely on the theatre, and her book, Actors, Pilgrims, Kings and Gods, The Ram Leela at Ramnagar, is published by Siegel, 1990-2004. We all know Dr. Kapur, so I'll keep it very brief, as directed by ma'am. We welcome you here, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here, and thank you National School of Drama, and thank you Tobias for being here and being part of a conversation. We were in fact talking outside a little bit in preparation, or what shall we say, we were doing a bit of a rehearsal, but we found that the best thing is to actually talk here together. I had a series of thoughts which I think perhaps might interest us as a set of people who do have a history of the theatre which is very long, which is both very, how shall I put it, very important, significant and difficult history, in the sense that, you know, we could either see history as a continuity in the kind of theatres that we do, or we might see it as continuity and ruptures. And depending on where one is placed in the way that we imagine ourselves, I think sometimes the ruptures are stressed more and sometimes the continuities. But one of the things that I think we constantly do talk about, and it's also part of our, in a way, discussions that happen in a school like the National School of Drama, is about the question of Indian theatre and Indian theatres and Indiannesses. And I wondered whether there was something like that which you might have to think about or are part of a discourse around theatre making, and especially in terms of the kind of projects you take in Schaubühne?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for having me here. It's really a great honor to be on this stage at the National School of Drama in Delhi. It's my first time in India and in Delhi, so I'm full of impressions and I suck it all in. And it has already been quite an experience in the past 36 hours, and I'm very much looking forward to presenting a show that we've made at Schaubühne here at in your theater, in the Theatre Olympics, and we're very thrilled to see how it works here. Now, to your question, it's an interesting question because, as a matter of fact, at first I would say no, there's no such discussion, a German theater as opposed to a non-German theater. But what is interesting when I come to think of it, the Schaubühne has always conceived itself as an international theater, which the question is, what does that mean? It first means that we have lots of international partners. We present our work all over the world, which is a great honor for us to travel through all continents with the various productions that we have. So this is international. But actually, when you look at it more closely, there is also a great, the artistic work where we come from has started with a great influence from abroad. Actually, very specifically because this Baracke was also mentioned, where I first worked as producer with Thomas Ostermeyer together, was very much influenced by the Royal Court Theatre, which I think you know over here, and their work with and for authors, and this aspect of a contemporary author writing about his world, his environment, his topics, her topics, is something that is very, very, very important for the artistic work of Thomas Ostermeyer, but also the artistic work of Schaubühne. So there is an international influence. There's always been an international influence, and we may talk about this a bit more. But at the same time, the focus on issues, themes, topics is at the same time very local. So we want to we look at Berlin, at Germany, at Europe, at ourselves in this context, and try to deal with those topics and try to write about them, to make theatre about them, and funnily this local view is drawing or is getting an international attention. So artistically, we're very local, I could say, but the international aspect is very important. Now, the German aspect, there's no in the Schaubühne, in our theater, there is no discussion about being German or not German. Actually, in Germany, there is a notion of you don't really want to be German. You rather not talk about being German. It, of course, has to do with our history. So there's not this discourse about being a German theater, but the German theater in you know, there is a very rich theater culture and theater structure in Germany. This is, in a way, very German. There is over 260 theaters in Germany with a structure, with actors, with technicians, producing a lot of shows. So this is a very German theater, and as opposed to that, we are in that structure, even though we are a private, legally we are a private company, but we still get funds from the city of Berlin. So we have a very similar structure to those state theaters. But as opposed to them, we try to reach out, we try to connect, and that is acknowledged by the politicians, by the city of Berlin, but not to an extent that we think is necessary, because we think that in our world nowadays we just need to. We really need to build up international cooperations more and more and more, and of course that takes up resources, money, etc., etc. And politicians tend to look at only their little context and what comes out for them. That was a long answer, sorry.
It's a long question as well. No, thank you very much. If I might actually, I think you've pointed to some things that are really sort of resonate a great deal here. I would like very much to know a little bit about when you were saying the structures. I mean, the structures would mean actually building as well as the structure of companies, and that there is the structure across Germany. So does the structure in some senses actually point to certain kinds of plays being done by particular kinds of structures, or would you say the structure remains not identified by, well, let's say, does the structure of it affect the work?
Oh yes, yes, a lot. You may even say it defines the work. And then the question is, to what extent, or in how many different ways? Yes, a lot. And well, the Schaubühne, and maybe I just speak a little bit about the structure of the Schaubühne, because it's a kind of unique theater. It is as I said before, it's a private company. It was founded 1962 by some crazy students in West Berlin wanting to make theater, and then it grew and grew bigger and bigger and became more prestigious and more famous, and received as a private company money from Berlin to make theater. By now we are still a private theater, a non-profit company, limited company, but we receive a good portion of our budget from Berlin, and we have a building that the city of Berlin gave to us. Actually, they built it for the Schaubühne back in the 70s, and it opened '82. It has a lot to do with the history of West Berlin, East Berlin, because West Berlin was a deserted area. Everybody left during the 60s, 70s, and so the federal government of West Germany put a lot of money into West Berlin, and kept especially culture very high. So there was lots of money, and the Schaubühne certainly profited from that. And but also, of course, there was there was a great artistic success back then with Peter Stein as artistic director, and this. So this is like very briefly the historic background of Schaubühne, and now we have this building which is given to us by the city of Berlin. It's a very nice, wonderful old cinema building. designed by Erich Mendelssohn in the 1920s, and it was reconstructed for the purpose of a theater with multi-flexible spaces, and quite fascinating and nice. And besides the building, we have 250 people working for the Schaubühne. There's technicians, there's all departments, there's workshops, and there's also an ensemble of actors. That structure waits for an artistic leadership saying what to do with it. And of course that defines the work in the sense that you need to program that theater structure with something that fits to that. So we have to produce ourselves. We have all these technicians, all the workshops. They can do wonderful work. They can build wonderful sets, etc. Then we have actors, and they want to be on stage. So we look for plays for those actors. For example, Ursina Lardi, who you will see tonight on stage, is one of our actresses in the ensemble, and she's a very prestigious actress. And of course, if you have somebody like that in your ensemble, you look for work for this particular actress. And we have 35 actors, and they all knocking on the door of Thomas Ostermeier and say, what am I going to do next? Tell me what I... So they need an artistic perspective, and we look for those actors, but that's... So that defines a lot. And of course the choice of actors defines the work. And actually there's a big discussion now in Germany, the question of diversity. Do the actors in our ensembles of the different theaters, do they actually represent our society? And of course, you know, largely they don't. Because there's only certain, it's a big topic now, you know, who will be trained in the theater school? Like yours, you know, do people from a working class background, do they get the chance to be trained? From a migration background, do they get the chance to be trained? It's actually a social question, and of course, over many years, the selection who gets to be trained, who gets accepted in acting schools, was a social question also, not deliberate, but like it happened like that. And of course those people now in the ensembles of German theaters, they come out of acting school, and now there is a shift, and there is a big discussion about, you know, who should be on stage and what kind of policy the theaters follow, and of course when that changes, then you look for other. Then certainly also the thinking of how to program your theater changes. So that is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is the artistic director, Thomas Ostermeier in this case, together with dramaturgs. I think you don't know what a dramaturg is. It's like an artistic advisor to the artistic direction on the one hand, and the artistic advisor, collaborator, who then works with a director during the course of a production. A very important person, because they are engaged, they're hired by the Schaubühne, by the theaters, and then they collaborate with the directors who are hired for certain productions. And of course these groups of people, they have a discourse about our times, and then they choose directors who they think fit best to our program, and they can be very diverse, at the same time, there is a core of what a certain theater stands for and the Schaubühne stands for. And then they choose plays, either plays are commissioned to authors, then directed by other directors, to authors who direct themselves, like Milo Rau. Milo Rau was commissioned to do a project, write a play and direct the play. We also do classical plays, but maybe that's another question. But yes, the structure defines largely what we do, and just to say this once more, and maybe this is something also that interests me coming here, what kind of theater structure do you have here? The theater structure in Germany, these 240 people employed by the Schaubühne to do work, is something very, very wonderful. And of course, that can only be possible because there's quite a lot of money put into that structure in order to create art. And I think this is very important, because only then I feel you can be free in your artistic choices.
Thank you very much. I think that's really something that, what you said is, I think, critically important, especially, at the moment, for instance, in India, we would be having a fair amount of discussion on what is the meaning of state funding, what is the meaning of being commercially viable, what does an actor or a theatre maker who comes out of a school like the National School of Drama, what would her skill set be? And I think that's critically important, partly in some senses because National School of Drama is one of the premier institutes in terms of teaching. So what does a school, like when you said the Ernst Busch, connects to certain companies, or graduate from the Ernst Busch will go into a theatre school, a theatre company. What I was interested to know is, what is the connection in some senses? Are there connections that are made between the kind of theatre training that happens in various institutions and the choice of a repertory company, of a performer, and a performer of a repertory company? Are there very clear lines like that? Or would you say the skill sets of actors who are from a training institute or various training institutes are similar? Would there be a kind of standard sort of actor training that produces the young performer at the moment in Germany, and maybe even city-wise, so that they could go to all kinds of companies? Or would there be more affinity between schools and
well, there are strong connections between theaters and theater schools in Germany in general. For example, there's a theater school in Munich that is literally next to the Munich Kammerspiele. And they actually collaborate very, very closely. In Berlin, it's a bit different. There's two big state theater schools, the Ernst Busch and also the University of the Arts. They have a certain reputation, a very good one, the Ernst Busch even better than the UDK, the University of the Arts. And they collaborate with the different theaters in the sense that, for example, with the Schaubühne, the theater school Ernst Busch makes a co-production with us, with their students, and they do a project in our studio theater, and then they play it in repertoire for at least a year, up to 50, 60, 70 performances. So they get the chance in their third year, which is the second to last year, they get the chance to work kind of under professional circumstances. And of course, that's also the chance for us to meet the students in a way. Of course, we are always invited to see their work at their school, and we all also go there. But if you have a student or a group of students work in a production, then you meet them differently, and they get engaged differently in that work, especially also over the course of that many performances. So that is a connection, and that doesn't only happen with the Schaubühne, that also happens with the other theaters in Berlin. And of course, Thomas Ostermeier is also a directing teacher at the Ernst Busch by now. So there's also a connection. There is, you could say, there is a strong link, and many of our actors in the company come from the Ernst Busch. At the same time, we also say, you know, also other schools are very, very important, and to some extent we think that other schools focusing on other training methods may even be more interesting to some extent, or in some focus, as opposed to the Ernst Busch. But there are links in both ways. And I think that is very important, and maybe that is even not happening enough. The influence of theater makers into schools, I think, could be bigger, could be greater. Sometimes schools have the tendency to, at least from what I know, I don't know about this one, of course, but to kind of enclose themselves in their method and not open up to other influences. That times are changing always, and I think you need to take in some influences at the same time without losing yourself. And for example, the directing school is going through, from what I hear and what I observe, is going through many different developments, also because they're taking up too many influences sometimes. So it's, anyway, the exchange is very, very important, I think, yes.
If I might just carry on with one more sort of question on this area. So what would be the kind of young actor that the Repertory or the Schaubühne would want to see in their company? Would there be particular kinds of skills? As you say, if there's a relationship of this kind, let's say with Ernst Busch?
Well, I'm not, no, there's no particular kinds of skills that we're looking for. As a matter of fact, sometimes we see skills, but we don't see characters, personalities, and of course, as the older you grow, the more personality you have, and that's absolutely fine. But at the same time, we believe that the personality of an actor is extremely important for the artistic work. So sometimes you have great skills, but you want to, you actually want to come to the point where the skills are there and are important, but are not there for their own sake. And that is something that often, especially students coming from Ernst Busch, you see only skills or too much skills, and then you have to work on personalities. And Thomas Ostermeier, as a director, is very, very committed to that more and more, and trying to find a way for the actor to come to himself and discover himself, for the personality to add to the character that is played on stage.
One of the things that I think which you said and which one knows through the work that Schaubühne does is what you called an internationalism, and also the fact of having different, I mean, looking at the now, where, you know, one has to see a kind of democratization of entry into both schools as well as in companies. So, is there something that you might want to tell us about that kind of interest or ambition within the company to deal with the kind of international aspects of being in the world today, which whether it's the kind of certain sorts of populism, the problem of refugees, I mean, things which affect us all across. But
absolutely. Well, the interesting thing is that very internationally very successful production like Enemy of the People, a show that actually was presented here in Delhi and in Kolkata and in Chennai 2 or 3 years ago, yeah, 15, that is extremely successful all over the world, literally all over the world, and of course you don't plan that, and this is the interesting thing. Also compassion, same situation. You want to do something, and that you means the director, the dramaturg, the theater, but and it has to do with how you see the world, and for example, Enemy of the People, Thomas was interested in this critic on capitalism that goes beyond the point of the democratic processes and goes actually into populism. And then he made the production. He inserted this public speech from a communist, very radical group from France. They wrote the coming uprise, a paper they wrote anonymously. And he took that paper and put it on stage, and it criticizes capitalistic way of life, and then it goes into discussion about our society, and what is very interesting is that the audience applauses the speaker. Because it is an analyze of capitalistic life, and we're all fed up with it, or we all see the danger. At the same time, we benefit from it. But then the discussion goes about, well, is it correct to, what's the democratic procedure here, and how do we decide on how we live, and over the course of the last 5-6 years, this production is still on, and it has changed a lot. And it has changed. Not we play it the same way, but the world has changed, and so it responds differently to our world. Now there is extreme populism in Europe, in America, etc. So you find a different way, and this process you cannot control, and you cannot plan. It just happens. And a little bit the same with the compassion here. It was not intended to be a production about refugees It was intended to be a production about Congo, actually. And then the refugee crisis happened. And then Milo Rao, as director and author, reacted on that together with Usina. And then this came out, and it's and this refugee crisis has been going on ever since, and has a great impact on Germany. So what I'm saying is, you don't plan these international careers of productions. You begin thinking about a problem that affects you as a director, as a writer in Berlin, in Germany, and if it hits a nerve, it may trigger something that goes way beyond our borders. And this is the way how we like to think about work. If you plan something, and I'd say this is going to go internationally, it probably won't work.
I agree completely. And I was just interested just to take that forward in terms of Enemy of the People. So if it's traveled such a great deal, and some of us would have seen it and some not, how do you actually localize it in terms of the problems that a city or where it goes? Is there, when the audience participates, how does it get localized? Is there a conversation prior about where it's going in terms of localizing some of the problems that might be talked about?
Well, there is, we don't really localize it. So we say, this is the production as it is, and then it relates to the problems in the specific country and town. And sometimes we localize it just a little bit. For example, when we went to Istanbul, there were just these Gezi protests going on back in 2013, and we just put in one scene there was a politician, actually a collaborator of a politician who kicked a demonstrant, a person demonstrating. He lying on the ground, and he kicked him with his foot. And in one scene, we put this in a fight between the two brothers. And of course, this was recognized immediately. Or you put in a phrase, and then you recognize it. But we don't change it generally. In Enemy of the People, what changes is the discussion. When you open to the public, and then you get into a discussion about the society, the way of life in that specific area. Of course, that is very much determined by that specific area. And when we were in New York City, it was a very intellectual debate on how democracy works and how it doesn't work. In Argentina, it was the whole audience was shouting and was asking the artistic director of the festival to stand up, because they thought that because he used to be the cultural minister, he was the bad guy, and they were shouting, and the people, we thought we had to finish the play and just leave it there, because they were so engaged in each other that we were out. In Moscow, half of the people in the audience came on stage and just started the debate, and at a certain point the actor said, "Should we just continue and forget about the play?" So that happens. So, but in general, we don't localize. Also, this play tonight, of course, it's about Europe. It's about the refugee crisis from Syria coming over Turkey, Greece to Germany. Of course, we leave it like it is, and then you can make a transfer to whatever reality you have here. We have another production that just opened in September Retour à Reims, which is talking about the extreme right populism in France and in Europe, and we played it for 3 weeks in New York City, and the audience loved it, even though it was talking about France and Europe and not about Trump. But of course they knew the production was also talking about that. But you don't need to localize it, really.
Thank you. I think that does make many things clear, including, you know, the word is, the two words are very often used and sometimes lose their meaning, the kind of participation in a debate. But that would necessarily, as you said, if in Russia you have the people coming up onto stage, then you have actually changed form very, you know, pertinently to that place. So I think that changes greatly. I want to just ask another set of questions. I know the Schaubühne does a large sort of part of its work is also looking at classics. So are there any, would there be, I mean, I think in some senses the Greeks present a constant conversation between rights and the state, and so would there be any kinds of particular work or interests in terms of the classics? Do they fall into some kind of dialogue with the present, which is very distinctly your theatre's interest?
Well, the question always is, when we do a classical play, what does it tell us now? And so we don't do classics because they're classics and they're wonderful plays, but we do it because we think that play speaks to us right now. And Thomas Ostermeyer found Ibsen as one playwright back in the 19th century, late 19th century, writing about the bourgeois life back then, that can very, very well be transferred to our times. And then he literally adapts it in language. He doesn't really change plays, but he adapts them, mostly in language, and an enemy of the people in that speech, for example. So Ibsen is one kind of classic that we have liked to adapt. Another one, of course, is Shakespeare. Shakespeare is a universal playwright, and sometimes it's also quite a nice situation that you have to translate Shakespeare, because in that process of translation, you adapt. By making a new translation, you automatically have to adapt to our times, and our long-term artistic collaborator, writer, and director, Marius van Meinburg, has done all the Shakespeare translations for us, and it was extremely important to have those new translations, and they're not, I mean, they're contemporary language, but they're not, you know, there's no modernism in that, as in there's a mobile or anything like that, but it's a very contemporary approach to that poetic language, and if we stage that in a contemporary way, like Hamlet, like Richard, there is lots of contemporariness in it, without being, you know, nowadays. So we like to create associative spaces, and you can recognize yourself in that play again. And actually, when we toured with Hamlet throughout the world, this was also a very nice experience, how a play responds in different places. We once played in Ramallah, and when you hear that dialogue, to be or not to be, and whether I should take weapons and fight or kill myself, this is becomes so real. Or this simple sentence, Denmark is a prison, this becomes so real. And this is this kind of reality we're looking for, also for Germany. Of course, Germany is not a prison, but still there are other aspects that you can find. And so there's always the attempt to find something contemporary in those classics. And if we don't find it, we don't do it. For example, very funnily, we don't rarely do Greeks. They're wonderful plays, really wonderful. We've done one Oedipus, which was staged by the Italian director Romeo Castellucci, but he is a theater maker who works a lot with visuals, and he implanted this play into a monastery, a Christian monastery, and so it became something completely different. Thomas Ostermeyer, for now, has not found an approach to Greeks. But this also shifts. Thomas Ostermeyer has now found an approach to Chekhov. He hasn't done that for years, but now he has found something. So this is always the question of what can we find in a certain play that responds to our reality. And this has a lot to do with the fact that we think the author relating himself or herself to the reality, the social, the political reality around us is always the center of our artistic work.
This just brings me to one other thing that you mentioned. So that means if you do, let's say, an Ibsen now, is it every time it's a different? Is it translated for the company?
Yes, yes, that's the point. Right now, for example, there's a big discussion about Wild Duck right now. You know, a play everybody knows, wonderful play, but we discuss and discuss, yeah, well, but how can we tell this now? What does this conflict mean? What does that constellation mean? Back in Ibsen time, it's socially connotated in a certain way. This doesn't make sense today anymore. How can we change it? What do we have to cut out? What do we have to adapt, change? But these changes, at least when Ostermeyer does it, these changes are always very close to the author. We believe that we kind of want to step into the author's eyes and look at what he was trying to tell back then and what he would tell nowadays. But it's always a specific adaptation and also new translation, which means the specific words are changed to nowadays language.
Could you tell us a little more about this kind of thing, about the specific word being changed? In the sense, I know that it'll have to move from one to us to English, but what kind of change would it mean?
Well, it's really literally Thomas Ostermeyer. He's our Ibsen director, so we don't have anybody else directing Ibsen. And so him and his dramaturg, Marius van Meinburg or Florian Borchmeier, who adapted Enemy of the People, they keep reading different translations, and then they say, well, I would say it like that, I would say it like that, I would go. So they try to find a language by themselves. They kind of rewrite it. But what they don't do, we were just talking about this adaptation of Johan Gabriel Borkman by Simon Stone, an Australian director, and he adapts it in a he really rewrites and makes very contemporary settings as well. There is mobiles, there is a TV, whatever, And Thomas doesn't really do that, even though there are contemporary characters on stage and they use mobiles, etc., maybe if necessary, but they don't. He's not looking for a kind of superficial modernization, but he's more looking for a very contemporary language. Like, how would we? And Ibsen is a realistic author, naturalistic author maybe, and so the question is, how do we speak today? And then in the process of rehearsals, they change things. Yeah. Sometimes an actor would say, "Oh, this sounds a bit awkward," and then they change it. But Shakespeare's different. Shakespeare's different. There's Marius von Meinbock, he translates, and that's an artistic, poetic act, and that is not changed.
So it would be changed in. There would be certain texts that could get changed in rehearsal, and with the collaboration of the actors.
Yes.
So it is about how it sort of rolls off, or how it gets embodied in some senses by the actor.
Yes, exactly.
So is that a kind, would this be a very regular kind of, not regular, but is that something that this kind of collaboration happens in most of the texts, let's say, of Ibsen, as they come, or in Ostermeyer's work?
Yes, in all work that is a that needs a realistic way of acting. Yes, then yes. In all work which is Shakespeare or a new contemporary play that has been written in German, you don't change it, because you look for. I mean, this is a challenge. Sometimes a text, a script seems awkward, but you want to find out what is in that text. But if it is an adaptation, a new translation, and you are looking for a modern language, then this is a process.
I was also just wondering if, in some senses, in a country like India, there would be very many relationships within the country between languages and, between various regional languages, Hindi, and those are always fraught with this kind of thing, is how it comes off the tongue, how does it work with an actor. So I think it's something that is, I think, very close to most theatre making here, where, this quite, how should I say, a relationship with language that's very real and about today. It's not necessarily about having to retain a certain faithful aspect to it. Because in any case, lots of all international aspects of what texts get played here, or even regional translations, what's the real one and what's the translated one, those are all gray areas. And I think, in a way, if the actor also collaborates in that, it makes for interesting theatre making.
We have a very interesting example. I come to think of it because you say the different languages, regional languages, which are, I think, quite different here than in Germany. In Germany, you have different dialects. They differ quite a lot, but it's still dialects of German. And one author, Ödön von Horvath, he lived until 1938 and died at the age of 1937, at the age of 38, he died, already being killed by a tree falling down. And he was a very famous German author, South German author, coming from Hungary, actually, and he wrote in dialect. At least the thinking of the characters are very South German in this dialect. And Thomas Ostermeyer just rehearsed a production, Italian Night it is called. We had to interrupt it because an actor fell ill and we have to premiere it. It was supposed to open now. And of course, he really wanted the actors, or he wanted Bavarian actors, because this language is so important, because it's not just the language, it's the thinking that determines the language. And we do have some Bavarian actors in our company, but of course not all of them. And then he was forced, because he loves these actors, he was forced to cast actors who are not Bavarian. And of course he doesn't make them speak Bavarian, that doesn't make sense. But what he tries, like one is from Saarland, which is a region in the west, southwest of Germany. So he takes that dialect, or one comes from Berlin and he takes that dialect, and of course things change, but what he's looking for is to give this kind of personal note and this that is so important to those characters, coming all from a very working class background, and not upper class, and so he adapts it in this way.
I think that's, again, something that is a very real consideration for any theatre making here in our country. I was just wondering one other thing. I mean, Tripurari could advise me. Could we open the discussion to questions, if there's any questions that you would like to have about? I think the things that we've been talking about are things that are prior to our seeing the play, so there is a wider ground to cover about, again, translations, about casting, about actually the structures of companies. If I might add one thing and ask a question, what is the way that, and this is totally different, is about the structure of a repertory company. How are they kind of time bars to actors within a company? There is a certain contract of a certain kind, and do they get, there is a certain time that an actor can be with a company? Is that any sort of,
well,
is it structurally anything like that?
Yes, actors always have limited contracts. It starts usually at least 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then the contracts extend for another season each year. You have to actively end a contract if you want to end it, otherwise it is just extended year by year. Year by year. Yeah, so, but it is important that there is the possibility of a limit, because artistic partnerships change, and after a certain while the actor might say, no, this is not my place anymore, this is not my director anymore. Directors change. Sometimes actors just lose their directors because they've gone someplace else, and then they're without work, and then they have to look for another place. And also sometimes, which is mostly a much more difficult process, when an artistic direction has the feeling that this partnership is not fruitful anymore.
Thank you, Tobias. Is there any questions that you might want to bring up here and we can talk about them? Any thoughts that you might want to share with us? Please.
Hello, sir. My name is Ayush. This was quite a good talk. In between, you said something about the skill set of the actor and also the personality of the actor. So, I wanted to ask, what does the actor have to do with her personality while playing the character? Or are you basically saying that how he is as a person is also important as how he can do the character.
I'm trying to answer these questions and replacing Thomas Ostermeyer, for example, for whom this question is very important, but probably just as important to Milo Rao, who is here in this festival. So I will try to give an answer. I'm not sure if this is a good answer. I think that as a spectator, you want to when you see a play and when you see a character, you want this to be. You want to have an experience, and to make that experience as truthful and as possible, the actor has to fill his play with reality. And the best source for that is your personality. Because if you have experienced something, and I'm not saying that anything you play you have to experience, completely bullshit, but if you connect certain things that you have to play with experiences that may be similar, that may be relate to that in some way, you fill it with your reality. And if the aim is to make believe as best as possible what you are representing on stage, I think this is a good way to do it. I don't know if you understood.
Yes.
About how you work with playwright like Ibsen, I mean the plays of Ibsen as well as Shakespeare. When you mentioned that you embodies the when the actors sit together and work, they eventually what comes out of the script. You embody, the actors get to embody in a different way. Then in the case of Shakespeare is when an artist tries to explore the scope of the script. So, is it because there's no apparent reality in case of, I mean, Ibsen comes in So, Ibsen's plays are realistic. So, is it because there's no apparent realism in Shakespearean scripts, that, or also because that you think that there's a lot more that can be explored, as in case of reading between the lines and all that? Is that the reason why you it's just something that you said already.
Yeah.
That, when you work with an Ibsen script or a Shakespearean script, there's a different methodology to it. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, I hope I understood your question. I think the difference really is that Shakespeare's writing is a very poetic writing, and there is and you have to, as a translator, you have to find certain answers to the original writing. There is rhymes, there is certain rhythms to the lines, and you have to find an answer to that. And when this translator, in this case Marius van Meyenburg, has found his way of dealing with that language, then it's a creation of its own. It's a play, it's a writing. And as an actor, you have to deal with that. And it's a completely different process than when you take an Ibsen and say, okay, now this is, I want to make it very realistic. I want to make it like I'm in my own kitchen and quarreling with my wife. And I want to make it very realistic, this kind of quarrel. That's different, and this is Ibsen, and and Shakespeare is another level of language, and you have to find the challenge in the language, and you have to find the reality in that language, but it's not about making it to your own nowadays language. I think that is a difference. I don't know if that is giving you a good answer, but it's an attempt.
They're quite similar, I think so. I wanted to know about how the group reaches to a certain form of presenting the play. Is it within the process of translation or adaptation? When there's choosing a script and getting it adapted or translated, is that a moment when there's already a certain kind of form involved in which you want to present the play, or the form is coming with working with the actors? And the second question is, okay, what do you mean by the process of translation or adaptation when you use the terms?
I'm not sure if I understood the first question. Can you repeat it once more?
The performance which is made, it has that form. So do you reach the form in the process of adaptation, a certain kind of a structure of how the play will be looking? Is it already there when you choose a script and adapt it, or it comes after that?
Well, yes, it comes after. So first you choose a play, then you make an adaptation or a translation, and in this process, of course, you find out on what you focus in a play and what your interest is, and then eventually you find you think about a set design. And when thinking about a set design, of course, it's much determined by what you want to tell and how you want to tell it, and that evolves. Then the form of that particular production evolves. And the second question is about adaptation and translation again. Something that, can you specify the question in relation to what I already talked about?
While you were talking, I couldn't understand what do you mean by translation and adaptation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Translation of just the language, or what else changes in that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like a real translation is maybe something that I was talking about with Shakespeare. So we have a person who's Marius van Bijenborg, and he translates the play. And then Thomas Ostermeier, for example, takes that play and directs it in that translation, and as I said, it doesn't really change anything. And then there's another. It's more an adaptation. For example, if you take an Ibsen or a Chekhov or even a German author like Horvath, what I was talking about before, or Schnitzler, who's also an Austrian German-speaking author, and there is adaptations in the sense of course, you make cuttings and you make editing, like what scenes you take out and what you live in. That is one adaptation, but of course there's more to it, and that means that you take the language and adapt it to our nowadays language, and that only happens really with the so-called, what we would say, so-called realistic plays. And when you take a director like Thomas Ostermeier, this is a very delicate process of taking the original, maybe even in Ibsen, a translation of the original, and then transforming it into another language that is our language. But there's others, to be on. I mean, to be, you know, it's not only Thomas Ostermeier who works at the Schaubühne, but you have Milo Rau, for example. And like Milo Rau, he didn't do that with compassion, but what he sometimes does is he rewrites a play. So you take a play, and then you take the structure of the play and the scenes, and you rewrite it on the dramaturgy of the original play, but with nowadays characters, with nowadays conflict. So you kind of change the play, but you stick to the dramaturgy of the play. That's another process that can be used, and we have used it as well. But yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I actually have two doubts. One is that you talked about what you look in your actors. Do you also have any sort of expectations from your audiences? And the second doubt is, I'm sorry I'm bringing this up again, but it's really stayed with me that I didn't understand what you mean by experience. I mean, I don't understand how one can judge the other person's experience. So if you could elaborate on that.
Okay. Yes, we do think of our audience, but more we observe our audience. So we observe the audience reacting to our plays, and of course that has an effect on future decisions. For example, many years ago we did plays that dealt with that dealt with characters at the edge of our society, and personally I think there were really great plays and great productions, but we didn't find an audience for that. And when we shifted our perspective to the middle class, then we found an audience. It's a bit simply said, but in a way there is some truth to it. And of course, if you make an experience with certain plays and see how they respond to how an audience responds to certain plays, then you learn from that, and that has an impact on future decisions. Sometimes you make a decision for an artist, and you know that this is going to be difficult. The audience is not ready for that, or is not used to this kind of aesthetics or topics or whatever, and then you decide nevertheless to produce that artist because you think this is very important. And then you make horrible experiences sometimes, and you say, well, it was a nice try, but we can't go on. Or you think, well, actually, you have to have a longer breath, and then keep the play in repertoire, but not very often. And then you gradually build an audience for that. So yes, we do think of our audience. Okay, this other question, I think, is something that goes. I don't know how to I understand that there's doubt, and of course, if you act a murderer, you don't have to be a murderer to act a murderer. No, of course not. But don't you have to try to think of how a murderer would look at the world? Don't you have to kind of understand the perspective of that specific character, and in order to embody that that character, in order to make believe that this is real and that it's not just acting. And the question is, and I think this is a methodological question of acting, and I'm actually, even I was trained as a director, I worked for many years as a producer, so maybe I'm not such an expert in that, and maybe you're an even better expert in that. But at least what I would say is, how can you achieve as an actress, as an actor, to come as close to that situation in which the character is in as possible? And one way is to find something in your own reality that kind of relates to that. At least that is one method. But maybe this is something that you can also comment on. It's one of the biggest questions.
It is. And I was just going to say it's a question that seems to have a different avatar every some years. And I think that perhaps is what, for instance, Tobias has said, the methods by which you go close to the thinking of a character might be very different. But the fact that you have to is common to different kinds of acting methodologies. And it would be the idea that how can you, what you do on stage must actually seem to be, this is a, value-laden word, but since we use it a lot in the theatre, truthful. And to that extent, it should be clear why somebody is doing an action. And I think that even if the action itself is confused, it should be clear that there is a confusion in an action, and how you go near to it would be different processes, and I think they would be differently dealt with even in different productions. And an actor may actually find a process which she may use every time, and sometimes not find the answer and will have to find another process. But I think it's actually something that seems to be fundamental to the process of being on stage, I think. And so it's a big question and has long answers. So I don't know anything.
I think it started when I talked about personality, right? And this question about skills and personality, right? And when you think of the kind of basic idea of theater, a person on stage telling a story, and how this story is told, then I think the greater the personality is of that actress, of that actor on stage telling a story, the bigger the experience is for the audience. And this is maybe what I mean. And it doesn't have to, and I'm not sure if you understood it that way. At least this is not the way I would like it to be understood. Is that you have to, of course, yes, you have to be truthful, but of course you have to have skills, and you don't. For example, Lars Eidinger in our company playing Hamlet, he steps out of the character in it. He plays roles as the character, as the actor. You don't. Sometimes he's the actor, Lars Eidinger. Sometimes he's Hamlet. Sometimes he is Hamlet playing a character, and it always changes. So there's lots of skills. But what makes it to an experience? What makes it a great theater experience? A very touching experience with emotions that drag you away, make you weep, make you laugh, make you forget yourself. I think in the core of it is an actor who has gone a long way with our company, by the way, so I know him so well, and he has really grown. He's always had skills, great skills, but he has grown in his career to become a personality on stage. And this is what carries you away. This is at least what I think. I don't know, maybe you still have doubts, which is absolutely fine, and I think everybody has to have doubts, otherwise you can't get anywhere.
So according to you, who takes more liberty, like the translator and the adapter? And my second question is, if the translator, adapter, and the director is the same person, then how he or she can proceed?
And what?
If the translator, adapter, and the director is the same person,
Yeah.
then how he can deal with a subject or a play? How he can proceed towards the performance? If you can elaborate on this.
I think the liberty of an adapter or translator can vary, can be very different. Sometimes the liberty of a translator is very, very big, and sometimes just as well for the adapter. I wouldn't say one is bigger than the other. It just really depends on what is the task, maybe. And if the director is the adapter and the translator, I'm not sure what is the liberty of that director? Well, of course, there's a great liberty. Milo Rau is a director who writes his plays, and sometimes, as I said before, rewrites older plays, other plays, and adapts them. And of course, that is maybe taking the most liberty, because he is following his idea very radically as a director, as an author, and as an adapter. And there is no other person that he, or no other authority that he would accept in that process. There may be a play, there may be a subject, there may be a topic, but he takes full liberty to just take it and use it for his own sake. Yeah.
We can have one last question before we wind up. Is there anybody who would like to ask something? Well, thank you very much, Tobias, for a wonderful set of questions that you raised, and as I take her word, many doubts, which are always, I think, very creative to be dealing with. And also I think the affinities as well as our shared concerns about, languages, about authorities as well as freedoms, I think something that we all as theatre makers and theatre students and theatre teachers constantly battle. So thank you very much for bringing this up, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And formally, I would thank both of you for a very illuminating discussion and taking us through a journey of many, many internal areas of theatre practice, which we will think about and keep with us. Thank you so much.